The American West is full of ghost towns that stand testament to the entire communities that were hastily built to support gold and silver finds. But when the claims dried up or a new vein was discovered elsewhere, the population simply drifted away, leaving behind abandoned buildings and forgotten history. Bannack, Montana is one such ghost town. More than 60 buildings stand testament to a town that supported one of Montana's earliest gold finds and was briefly the Montana territorial capital. Among those ruins is a gallows. And the strange story of Henry Plummer, the town sheriff, who was also purportedly the leader of a criminal gang who was hanged from that gallows, is history that deserves to be remembered. William Henry Handy Plummer was born in 1832 near Addison, Maine. The youngest of 7 children, he contracted tuberculosis as a child and suffered from consumption for nearly his entire life. At the age of 19, Plummer decided to go to California, hoping to strike it rich in the gold rush. Plummer arrived at San Francisco Harbor on May 21, 1852. He worked as a clerk until he saved enough money to travel to a mining camp in Nevada City, California, to earn his fortune. Life in the mining camps of the 1850s and 1860s was a rough and tumble existence. The camps would center around saloons and gambling dens, where men who had pulled a fortune in gold dust from the ground would drink and wager the hours away until they could return to their claims and, hopefully, do it all again. It was a lawless frontier with few lawmen in courts, circumcised by a curious unspoken code. Men would brook no insults to their honor or courage. If insulted, fights could break out quickly and with deadly repercussions. Gunslingers and desperados either killed their opponents or smoothed misunderstandings over with alcohol. In this dangerous place, Henry Plummer, 5'11" tall with light brown hair and gray-blue eyes, worked as a rancher and a miner, but he quickly found out that more money was to be made selling supplies. In 1854, he opened a business with a partner called the United States Bakery on Pine Street in Nevada City. In a newspaper advertisement from April of that year, Plummer listed some of the goods for sale. The best assortment of bread, cake, and pastry to be found at all times on hand, together with a well-selected stock of pie, fruits, etc. The bakery's motto was, "Live and let live." The business was so successful, Plummer sold it for a profit. He started a saloon and then sold that for a profit too. Plummer was elected to the position of Nevada City Marshal in May 1856 by a vote of 424 to 417. As Marshal, Plummer was not only responsible for keeping order, but ensuring the citizens kept the city ordinances. For example, the Marshal kept people from fast riding their horses through town. He also levied a fine of $50 for the egregious crime of furious riding. Plummer was not necessarily popular with the bawdy and unkept citizens of Nevada City for trying to keep order. They made fun of him for his New England accent. Rougher types probably thought that they could push the young Marshal around. He was described as having a slim, athletic build, probably because of his lung disease. But Plummer had a steely streak and a quick draw to match. At the height of his gunslinging prowess, it was said Plummer could shoot 5 bullets in 3 seconds. But Plummer moved from lawman to outlaw when he became involved in a domestic dispute between John and Lucy Vedder. John Vedder beat and abused his wife Lucy, who decided to divorce him. Marshal Plummer came to her home on the night she was going to catch the stagecoach out of town. Unfortunately, the jealous Mr. Vedder showed up too, and when he found Plummer in his home, he pulled out his gun. "Your time is up," Vedder said, and shot at the Marshal, who coolly stood, pulled his own gun, and shot Vedder twice, killing him. In the following trial, Plummer was found guilty of murder rather than self-defense, because when he stood and shot at Vedder, he took 2 steps towards the man, which constituted following, a different action than simple self-defense. But the real reason for the verdict was likely that jurors assumed that he and Lucy Vedder were lovers. She and Plummer were maligned in the press, as people of that time could hardly imagine that a marshal would have defended a battered wife against her husband. A newspaper reported, "A man who could take another man's wife away and then shoot him down like a dog ought to be hung." Plummer was found guilty, appealed, got a second trial, and was found guilty again. The lawman was now a convicted criminal, sentenced to 10 years in San Quentin prison. Meanwhile, his tuberculosis had flared up. Plummer was so ill when he was admitted to San Quentin that the prison doctor wrote to California Governor John Weller and recommended Plummer's sentence be pardoned because he didn't believe the former marshal would survive more than a month or 2 in prison. The governor granted the reprieve, and Plummer, desperately ill, was free again. He eventually recovered, but had spent most of his fortune in defending himself in court. Others in the community looked askance at Plummer for not dying after being pardoned for being sick. Plummer began frequenting whorehouses and staying up late hours, drinking whiskey with the men he used to keep in line. Violence was common in such places. Plummer got into a fight with a man named William Riley. Riley pulled out a knife. Plummer pulled out his gun and shot Riley dead. Virginia city authorities arrested Plummer, but afraid that his prison record would prevent a fair trial, that night the deputies opened up the doors and looked the other way as their former town marshal walked out of jail and left California for good. Plummer went to mine gold in what was then called Washington Territory. Reportedly, Plummer prevented a lynching by vigilantes in the town of Lewiston by saying, "My friends, we must not in the beginning of the city do the very thing which we are gathered to prevent. These men may be guilty of the crime of murder, but we shall not be less guilty if we take the government in our own hands and put them to death other than by due process of law." The words were oddly ironic, given Plummer's eventual fate, but a supporter of the vigilantes took umbrage at his action, spurring yet another argument and another shooting. Once again, Plummer was forced to move on and decided to return home to Maine. But while waiting for a steamboat in Fort Benton, Montana, he met a man named James Vale, who needed assistance protecting his family during the summer from Native Americans at the Sun River Mission. Plummer and Jack Cleveland, an acquaintance of his from California, agreed to help, but both Plummer and Cleveland became interested in Vale's sister-in-law, Electa Bryan. Electa chose Plummer, and he promised to return in the spring to marry her. They left the Sun River Mission in November 1862 to make yet another fortune in the new boomtown of Bannack, which had seen over $700,000 in gold dust pulled from the ground near the Grasshopper Creek. Cleveland came with him, but their friendship had soured over Electa Bryan. The two quarreled one night in a saloon. Cleveland was full of bluster, saying he wasn't afraid of anyone, and he questioned Plummer's manhood. Plummer reportedly responded, "I'm tired of this," drew a pistol, shot once into the ceiling, and once into Jack Cleveland, killing him. A jury later decided, however, that the shooting was in self-defense. But Plummer's troubles in Bannack were not over. A butcher named Hawk Crawford was elected sheriff, a position Plummer had wanted, and the two began to quarrel. Hostilities built with threats exchanged on both sides until Crawford found Plummer standing on the street and shot him in the right arm with a double-barreled shotgun. Plummer survived, but the shot stayed his arm for the rest of his life. In the sheriff's election the following year, Plummer won and took office in May 1863. The office didn't pay much, but Plummer was also making money from his mining claims. Plummer married Electa in June of 1863, but she didn't stay with him very long. She left in August of the same year to go live with her family back east. There was all sorts of speculation about why newlyweds would break up so quickly, but Electa never shared her reasons. And then history gets a bit murky. The story that was accepted for decades was that Henry Plummer then became the leader of a group of road agents that accosted and murdered prospectors for their gold dust. In some accounts, as many as 100 victims were blamed on a shadowy group of vigilantes named the Plummer Gang, although the historical record could only find approximately 13 robberies and 20 killings during Plummer's time as sheriff in Bannack. Also called the Innocents, these organized desperados allegedly had secret signs and handshakes to recognize each other and preyed upon the men who were transporting their hard-won gold dust from their claims to the bank. As a result of robberies and holdups in the Idaho Territory, a vigilante group was formed, and the men began taking justice into their own hands. The claim that Plummer was the gang leader is based on the eyewitness testimony of one young man who thought he recognized Plummer when he was held up by 3 masked outlaws. The man, Henry Tilden, said he recognized Plummer because of a distinctive red-lined coat he was wearing. Another outlaw named Plummer as the leader of the gang in an effort to spare his life from the rope, but the vigilantes executed him anyway. Plummer's lung disease had flared up yet again when vigilantes took him from his sister-in-law's home on January 10, 1864. Martha Vale, Electa's sister, tried to keep Plummer from going with the men, but he calmed her fears, saying, "They just want to talk to me about Dutch John, a man who had been arrested earlier on suspicion of robbing a wagon train." But Sheriff Plummer was mistaken. The vigilantes also grabbed Buck Stinson and Ned Ray, Plummer's deputies. And as a group, they marched the men to the gallows in the sub-zero temperatures. Stinson and Ray were strung up first, cursing the vigilantes. Before his execution, Plummer reportedly said, "Give a man time to pray." When that request was refused, he said, "Give me a high drop, boys," and the vigilantes obliged. The 3 bodies were left on the gallows overnight and froze solid. Plummer was buried in a gully above Hangman's Gulch. He was only 32 years old. The line between lawman and outlaw was always thin in the Wild West, and many of the notorious figures of the day left behind a convoluted legacy. But most of what we know about Henry Plummer was actually written by his enemies, and the stories of his life, and particularly his death, were written by people who had reason to present him as being a worse man than he might actually have been. That vigilance committee hanged more than 20 people without trial, and they had to justify their actions. That's not to say that Henry Plummer was blameless or even a good fellow. By his own admission, he killed at least a half dozen people by self-defense or otherwise. But the claim that he had led a criminal gang that had gratuitously murdered 100 people was hard to fathom. I mean, he was hanged without trial on the flimsiest of evidence. In both Montana and California, he had always seemed to serve the community, and he never seemed to show a propensity for gratuitous killing. You could say that his gunslinging was a product of the times, but whether he was as bad a man as the people who hanged him claimed that he was is, well, still a matter of dispute. In 1993, a public school organized a well-publicized mock trial of Henry Plummer held in the county courthouse in Virginia City. The jury deadlocked 6-6. Partly based on that trial, a group of historians appealed to the Montana Board of Paroles and Pardons to seek a pardon for Henry Plummer. But the board decided that Henry Plummer had never been convicted of a crime in Montana, and so they had no authority to act. The ghost town of Bannack, Montana is today a state park, and you can go and visit it. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy, short snippets of forgotten history between 10 and 15 minutes long. And if you did enjoy, please go ahead and click that thumbs up button. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions for future episodes, please write those in the comment section. I will be happy to personally respond. Be sure to follow The History Guy on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and check out our merchandise on teespring.com. And if you'd like more episodes on forgotten history, all you need to do is subscribe.